At 27 years old, Sophia Carter lived a seemingly simple and peaceful life as an elementary school teacher. She loved her students, enjoyed her cozy apartment, and embraced the quiet rhythm of her daily routine. To outsiders, she was just an ordinary woman, dedicated to her work and content with her modest life. However, beneath this calm surface lay a past far more complex than anyone could imagine. Unbeknownst to everyone around her, she carried a history filled with secrets. Secrets even she had yet to uncover. It all began on a crisp autumn afternoon when Sophia met Ethan Sterling at a small cafe near her school. Ethan was warm, kind-hearted, and had a smile that could brighten even the darkest of days. From the moment their eyes met, there was an undeniable connection between them. He was different from anyone she had ever known. Genuine, thoughtful, and attentive. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and within months, they had built a deep and meaningful bond. What stood out the most was Ethan's humility. Never once did he mention his family's wealth, or the powerful empire they controlled. To him, Sophia was perfect just as she was. A dedicated teacher with a passion for helping children. 6 months into their relationship, the school organized a field trip to the aquarium, and Ethan, always eager to support Sophia, volunteered to accompany the children. It was a perfect spring day, filled with excitement and laughter. As they guided the kids through various exhibits, they stopped by the penguin enclosure, watching the little creatures waddle together in harmony. Ethan leaned down to one of the children and whispered something in their ear before turning to Sophia with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I've been doing my homework," he said playfully. "Did you know that penguins mate for life?" He paused before adding, "I want to do the same, Sophia. I love you." Before Sophia could fully process his words, Ethan dropped to one knee right there in front of the penguins, with the children giggling in the background. He pulled out a small velvet box, revealing a sparkling ring. "Sophia Carter, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. For a moment Sophia stood frozen, overwhelmed by the suddenness of it all. But as she glanced around, she noticed the children holding up homemade signs that read, "Say yes, Miss Carter." A laugh bubbled through her tears, and without hesitation she nodded. "Yes, Ethan. I'll marry you," she said, her heart swelling with joy. The children cheered, their laughter echoing through the aquarium. It was a moment Sophia would never forget. Yet, as with all good things, joy often walked hand in hand with complications. A few days later, Ethan sat beside her with a tense expression. "My father wants to meet you," he said quietly. There was an unease in his voice that Sophia couldn't ignore. Jonathan Sterling was a man of power and influence, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, one of the most successful business empires in the country. Meeting him felt like stepping into the lion's den. His office, perched high above the city skyline, exuded wealth and control. As Sophia sat across from him, she felt the weight of his scrutiny before he even spoke. "So you're a teacher," Jonathan said, his tone laced with condescension. "Do you know how much my company is worth?" Sophia hesitated, caught off guard by the abrupt question. "No, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not interested in those things." Jonathan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "They all say that at first," he said, shaking his head. "Then when the divorce comes, they want half of everything." His eyes bore into hers as he slid a document across the table. "If you want to marry my son, you'll sign this." Sophia glanced down and realized it was a prenuptial agreement, waiving any claim to the Sterling family's fortune. Ethan, who had remained silent until now, immediately protested. "Dad, this is ridiculous," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Sophia isn't like that." Jonathan dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "They're all the same until they prove otherwise." Sophia, unfazed, picked up the pen and signed the document without a second thought. "You're not even going to read it?" Jonathan asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I don't need to, Sophia replied, meeting his gaze without hesitation. I love Ethan. Your money means nothing to me. Jonathan narrowed his eyes, clearly taken aback. He had expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but not this quiet confidence. He said nothing more as she placed the signed contract back on his desk and left with Ethan. The months that followed were a whirlwind of wedding planning. The Sterling family insisted on a lavish ceremony, more about showcasing their wealth than celebrating love. Sophia's mother, Nina Carter, observed the process with quiet amusement, though a hint of concern lingered in her eyes. She was the only one who truly understood the depth of Sophia's past, the only one who knew why she could sign that prenuptial agreement without hesitation. The night before the wedding, Nina called Sophia into her room, her expression unusually serious. She handed her daughter a sealed envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Your biological father left this for you, she said softly. He wanted you to open it on your wedding day. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. My biological father? She asked, her voice unsteady. Nina nodded. There's so much you don't know, Sophia. So much I kept hidden to protect you. Tomorrow when you open this, you'll understand everything. The words sent a shiver down Sophia's spine, but she said nothing. She took the envelope and tucked it away, unable to shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. The morning of the wedding arrived, and the grand cathedral was filled with the country's most powerful business figures, friends and associates of the Sterlings. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, but Sophia's mind was elsewhere. In her hands she held the sealed envelope. Just before the ceremony began, Jonathan Sterling approached her, a smirk playing on his lips. I hope you don't regret signing that contract, dear daughter-in-law, he said smoothly, though there was an unmistakable edge to his tone. Before Sophia could respond, her mother stood up from the front row and walked toward her with purpose. She placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder and spoke with quiet authority. It's time, darling. Sophia's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. Inside she found a letter and several legal documents. As she began to read, the room seemed to shift. Jonathan's smirk vanished. The letter began, Dear Sophia, if you're reading this, your wedding day has come. Unfortunately, I am not there to walk you down the aisle. My name is Albert Vaughn, and I am your father. Gasps echoed through the cathedral as Sophia's voice rang out. She flipped through the documents, her heart pounding. Property deeds, stock certificates, and financial records, each one proving the unthinkable. Jonathan Sterling's face went pale as Sophia's voice remained steady. As of today, I control 51% of Sterling Enterprises. The silence in the room was deafening. Jonathan staggered back, his world unraveling before his eyes. The teacher he had dismissed as insignificant had just become the most powerful person in his empire. A stunned silence filled the grand cathedral as Sophia Carter stood at the altar, gripping the documents that had just turned her life upside down. She had entered this day as a simple elementary school teacher about to marry the heir to a business empire. But in a matter of minutes, she had been revealed as the rightful owner of Sterling Enterprises, a company that Jonathan Sterling, the ruthless businessman standing before her, had spent decades controlling. Jonathan's face, once smug and full of arrogance, had drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The audience, filled with the country's wealthiest and most influential figures, murmured in disbelief. Just moments ago they had viewed Sophia as a mere outsider, a schoolteacher marrying into wealth. Now she stood before them as the majority shareholder of one of the largest business conglomerates in the country. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, but she steadied herself, gripping the letter from her biological father, Albert Vaughn. The truth was laid bare. Her father had never truly abandoned her. Instead, he had spent years protecting her from the dangers of the corporate world, working from the shadows to build an empire under different names, ensuring that she would one day inherit what was rightfully hers. Jonathan Sterling, the man who had dismissed her as insignificant, had unknowingly lost control of the very empire he had fought so hard to protect. Ethan Sterling, Sophia's fiancé, turned to her, his eyes filled with admiration rather than the shock that surrounded them. "Sophia," he said softly, reaching for her hand, "I don't care how rich you are. I love you for who you are." Sophia's heart swelled. Despite the chaos, Ethan's love remained unchanged. He wasn't like his father. He had never been driven by greed or control. But before she could respond, Jonathan suddenly snapped out of his daze. "This is a trick," he spat, stepping forward, his hands shaking with barely contained fury. "Albert Vaughn is dead. His company dissolved years ago. This is impossible." Sophia's mother, Nina Carter, stepped forward, her calm demeanor exuding quiet authority. "Are you sure?" she asked smoothly, pulling out another set of documents. "I have here the records of every stock transaction involving Sterling Enterprises for the past 20 years. Would you like to review them?" Jonathan's hands clenched into fists as he stared at the papers. He had built his empire through manipulation, intimidation, and ruthless business tactics, but he had never expected to be outmaneuvered by the very people he had underestimated. Before he could say another word, another voice cut through the tension. An older man, leaning heavily on a cane, stepped forward from the back of the cathedral. A murmur spread through the crowd as they recognized him. "It's poetic justice," the man said, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. Jonathan's face went completely white. He took a step back, gripping the nearest pew for support. "Albert Vaughn," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophia turned toward the man who had just spoken. Her breath caught in her throat. This was him, her father. The man she had never met. The man she had believed was gone forever. Albert Vaughn stopped in front of her, his eyes, identical to hers, filled with emotion. "I'm sorry I missed so many years of your life, my daughter," he said, his voice thick with regret. "But I can finally be here for you on the most important day of your life." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as years of unanswered questions, doubts, and fears melted away. She took a trembling step forward before rushing into her father's embrace. The weight of 27 years of separation dissolved in that single moment. The room remained silent as father and daughter reunited. But Jonathan, who had been trying to quietly slip away, suddenly froze when Albert's voice cut through the air once more. "Leaving so soon, Jonathan?" Albert asked, turning to face him. "Don't you want to discuss how you tried to destroy my company 20 years ago? Or how you sent assassins to my home?" A shocked gasp rippled through the audience. Jonathan, now pale as a ghost, shook his head furiously. "That was business," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just business." Albert's expression hardened. "No," he said firmly. "That was cruelty. The same cruelty you showed when you forced a young teacher to sign a contract that stripped her of everything." He turned to the assembled guests, his voice clear and steady. "But life, as it often does, has a way of making things right." A wave of relief washed over Sophia as the truth unraveled before everyone. The power that Jonathan had wielded so ruthlessly was now gone. He no longer had control over her or Sterling Enterprises. At that moment, Sophia turned to Ethan. "The wedding will continue," she said, her voice unwavering, "if you still want to marry the heir to Vaughn Holdings." Ethan smiled, his gaze warm and full of sincerity. He took her hands in his and said, "Sophia, I would marry you even if you had no money." With that, the ceremony resumed, but with one significant change. Instead of Jonathan giving Sophia away, it was Albert Vaughn who took that honor. As she walked down the aisle, she could feel Jonathan's eyes burning into her back. But he was no longer in control. At the reception, surrounded by family and friends, Albert took the time to share the full story of what had happened years ago. How Jonathan had launched a campaign to destroy Vaughn Holdings. using illegal and violent tactics. How he had faked his own death to protect Sophia and her mother from the dangers threatening them. And how in the shadows he had rebuilt his empire, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The months that followed brought dramatic changes. Jonathan Sterling was removed as CEO, his past crimes exposed. Ethan took over the company, steering it in a new direction, one built on ethical business practices rather than greed and manipulation. Albert and Nina, after decades of separation, finally reunited. They married in a small, intimate ceremony, completely opposite to Sophia and Ethan's grand wedding but perfect in its simplicity. Their love had always been about quality, not quantity. In a groundbreaking move, Vaughn Holdings and Sterling Enterprises merged, forming a new powerhouse, Vaughn Sterling Global. Under Sophia and Ethan's leadership, the company focused on corporate responsibility, ethical business, and giving back to the community. Even Jonathan Sterling, once the embodiment of corporate greed, changed. Years later, a humbled version of the man returned. One evening during a family dinner, he looked around the table and said softly, "Money and power consumed me. They turned me into a monster who almost destroyed my own son's life." Sophia listened, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. While she could never forget what he had done, she knew that even the most lost souls could find redemption. As the years passed, Sophia remained true to her original passion, teaching. Despite running one of the most powerful business empires in the country, she continued to teach at Willow Creek Elementary once a week. She introduced a program that taught children the basics of teamwork, ethics, and entrepreneurship. "Some things," she often told her students, "are priceless." Hanging in her office was the framed prenuptial contract Jonathan had once forced her to sign. Now it served as a reminder, not of her humiliation, but of how life had turned the tables. And every Sunday, when Jonathan Sterling arrived for dinner, carrying gifts for his grandchildren, seeking business advice from Albert Vaughn, Sophia knew one thing for certain: justice had been served. Years had passed since that fateful wedding day when Sophia Carter reclaimed her true identity and her rightful inheritance. The once modest schoolteacher, underestimated by so many, had become the most powerful woman in the corporate world. But despite her newfound influence, wealth, and power, she remained deeply connected to her roots, never forgetting the simple yet fulfilling life she had once led. Under her leadership, Vaughn Sterling Global flourished. With her husband, Ethan Sterling, by her side, they transformed the conglomerate from a ruthless empire into a business built on ethical values, social responsibility, and integrity. Unlike his father, Ethan never sought power for the sake of dominance. He believed in fairness, in innovation, and in creating opportunities rather than exploiting them. Together, they turned the company into a model for sustainable and responsible business practices. One of the first initiatives they launched was the Nina Vaughn Foundation, named in honor of Sophia's mother, Nina Carter, the woman who had kept their family's legacy alive in secret for decades. The foundation focused on education and social welfare, providing scholarships, funding public schools, and supporting teachers in underserved communities. Sophia, despite her immense wealth, remained committed to her first love, teaching. Every week, she returned to Willow Creek Elementary, the same school where she had once taught full-time, to conduct special classes on entrepreneurship and ethical leadership for young children. She believed that real power lay in knowledge, and that true success was measured not by the wealth one accumulated, but by the impact one made on others. Jonathan Sterling, the man who had once sought to control her through intimidation and manipulation, was no longer the feared and ruthless businessman he had once been. After his downfall and public disgrace, he had retreated from the corporate world, spending years in solitude, reflecting on his mistakes. It wasn't until one quiet evening, 5 years after the wedding, that he finally reappeared. Sophia, Ethan, and their children were having dinner when an unexpected knock came at the door. Standing outside looking far older than before was Jonathan. He was no longer the sharp-suited executive with an air of invincibility. Instead, he was a man burdened by his past, seeking redemption. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice quieter, more subdued than ever before. "But I wanted to say, I was wrong. About everything." Ethan studied his father carefully before stepping aside to let him in. Sophia, too, remained silent, watching the man who had once tried to control her life now stand before her, humbled. Over the next few years, Jonathan slowly reintegrated into their lives, not as the domineering patriarch he once was, but as a grandfather eager to make amends. He spent time with his grandchildren, teaching them about business, not the ruthless, cutthroat tactics he had once employed, but the value of perseverance, responsibility, and ethical leadership. Though the scars of the past remained, Sophia believed that even the most lost souls could find their way back to the light. Meanwhile, Albert Vaughn, her biological father, embraced the role he had long been denied. He became a guiding force in Sophia's life, teaching her the intricacies of running an empire while also ensuring that she never lost sight of her values. He and Nina, after decades of separation, were finally able to share a life together. Their wedding, though small and intimate, was a celebration of love that had survived against all odds. Despite the enormous success of Von Sterling Global, Sophia remained determined to ensure that her wealth and influence served a greater purpose. She spearheaded initiatives in renewable energy, ethical sourcing, and fair labor practices, setting a new standard in corporate responsibility. She and Ethan traveled across the world, meeting with business leaders, policymakers, and educators to advocate for ethical capitalism, a concept that once seemed impossible in the ruthless world of big business. But beyond boardrooms and business strategies, Sophia found her greatest fulfillment in mentorship. She personally mentored young women in business, encouraging them to rise above societal expectations and build their own futures. She knew firsthand what it felt like to be underestimated, and she was determined to create opportunities for those who had been overlooked. Her most ambitious project, however, was the Vaughn Academy for Future Leaders, a school designed to bridge the gap between education and entrepreneurship. The academy focused on financial literacy, leadership, innovation, and social responsibility, ensuring that young minds not only had the knowledge to succeed but the ethical foundation to lead with integrity. Sophia's influence extended beyond business. She became a public figure, admired not only for her corporate success but for her unwavering commitment to ethical leadership. She was invited to speak at global forums, addressing audiences on the importance of integrity in business, education reform, and women's empowerment. She never let fame or power change her essence. At heart, she was still the same woman who had once stood in front of a classroom, teaching children with passion and dedication. One of the most profound moments of her journey came when she was invited back to Willow Creek Elementary to give a speech to the students. Standing before a room full of eager young faces, she looked out at them and saw herself, the young girl who had once believed that dreams were meant for other people, not for her. She smiled warmly and began. "I was once just like you," she said. "A student, a dreamer, someone who thought the world was too big to make a difference in. But the truth is, no matter where you come from, no matter how many people underestimate you, you have the power to shape your own future. You don't need a wealthy family or a powerful name. You need integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in." The children listened intently, some nodding, others scribbling in their notebooks. "Success isn't just about money," she continued. "It's about who you become in the process. It's about how many people you lift up with you. It's about staying true to yourself, no matter how high you climb." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Principal Harris, who had known her since the beginning, approached her with a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Sophia," he said. She nodded, feeling the weight of her journey. "Yes," she agreed. "But I never left." And it was true. Despite all the wealth, power, and success, she had never forgotten where she came from. Back in her office at Von Sterling Global, one particular object sat on her desk, a framed copy of the prenuptial agreement Jonathan had once forced her to sign. It was no longer a symbol of her powerlessness, but of how far she had come. She had signed that contract believing she had nothing, only to discover that she had everything, not just wealth, but love, family, and the ability to create a better world. Every Sunday, Jonathan arrived for family dinners, carrying gifts for his grandchildren and seeking business advice from Albert Vaughn, the man he had once tried to destroy. And every time Sophia looked across the dinner table at her family, she was reminded of an undeniable truth. The greatest victories in life aren't won through power, but through perseverance, integrity, and love. Years had passed since Sophia Carter had gone from an elementary school teacher to the head of Von Sterling Global, the most influential business conglomerate in the country. The transformation had been unexpected, but she had embraced her new life with determination, never allowing power to corrupt her values. She had always believed that business should be built on integrity, not greed, and she worked every day to prove that ethical leadership was possible. Despite her towering success, Sophia never lost sight of the people who mattered most, her family. She and Ethan had built not only a thriving business empire but also a loving home. They had 2 children, both of whom grew up with a deep appreciation for hard work and responsibility. Unlike the spoiled heirs of many wealthy families, Sophia and Ethan made sure their children understood that privilege came with duty. Every Sunday, their home became a gathering place for family dinners, where laughter, stories, and love filled the air. The most surprising addition to these gatherings was Jonathan Sterling, the man who had once been the greatest obstacle in Sophia's life. After his downfall, Jonathan had spent years reflecting on his past mistakes. No longer the ruthless businessman he once was, he had become a humble man who valued family more than power. At first, Sophia had found it difficult to accept his presence in their lives. The memories of his manipulation and arrogance still lingered. But over time, she realized that even those who had once been enemies could change. Jonathan had truly transformed, dedicating himself to making up for the years he had spent prioritizing wealth over his own son's happiness. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Jonathan raised his glass and cleared his throat. "I was wrong about everything," he admitted, his voice sincere. "For so many years I believed that power and control were the only things that mattered. I thought love was a weakness and that wealth was the only measure of success. But now, sitting here with my family, I realize how foolish I was." Sophia listened, watching as the man who had once tried to force her into signing away her future now spoke with genuine regret. "I spent my life trying to build an empire," Jonathan continued, looking at Ethan. "But in doing so, I nearly destroyed my own son's happiness. And Sophia, I tried to take everything from you because I was afraid. Afraid that someone outside our world could take what I had built. But you proved me wrong. You didn't take the company out of greed, you saved it. And more importantly, you made it better." Ethan reached for his father's hand, an unspoken forgiveness passing between them. Sophia, too, felt the weight of Jonathan's words. There was no point in holding on to resentment. He had already lost everything once, now he had found a different kind of wealth in the love of his family. Albert Vaughn, Sophia's biological father, smiled approvingly. "It takes great strength to admit when you were wrong," he said. "And it takes even greater strength to change." Sophia nodded. Forgiveness did not erase the past, but it allowed them all to move forward. Outside the walls of their home, Von Sterling Global continued to thrive. Under Sophia and Ethan's leadership, the company had expanded into new industries, from renewable energy to technology-driven education. Sophia had never been interested in simply making money, she wanted to create real change. One of her proudest achievements was the Future Leaders Initiative, a program designed to mentor young entrepreneurs, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. She believed that true leadership came from opportunity, education, and ethical decision-making, and she wanted to provide young people with the tools to succeed. The program's impact was undeniable. Many of the young individuals who had once struggled to see a future for themselves were now building businesses, developing innovations, and leading with integrity. The Nina Vaughn Foundation, named after Sophia's mother, funded scholarships and provided resources to public schools across the country, ensuring that children from all walks of life had access to quality education. Sophia had also taken a special interest in corporate ethics reform, working alongside world leaders and policymakers to create guidelines for responsible business practices. She had seen firsthand how greed could destroy lives, and she was determined to prevent future generations from repeating the mistakes of the past. As her influence grew, she found herself frequently invited to speak at global summits, addressing audiences on leadership, ethical entrepreneurship, and the role of women in business. She used her platform not for self-promotion but to inspire others to lead with integrity, compassion, and vision. Despite her demanding career, Sophia never let it consume her. She still made time to teach, returning to Willow Creek Elementary once a week to work with students. Many of them had no idea that their teacher was one of the wealthiest women in the country. To them, she was just Miss Carter, the kind teacher who made learning fun and encouraged them to dream big. One afternoon, while working with a group of students on a business simulation project, a young girl named Lily raised her hand. "Miss Carter," she asked, her eyes filled with curiosity, "did you always know you were going to be rich?" Sophia chuckled, shaking her head. "Not at all," she replied. "When I was your age, I thought success was something only special people could achieve. I never imagined I'd end up where I am today." Lily frowned. "Then how did you do it?" Sophia leaned forward, her expression warm and sincere. "I worked hard. I never let anyone tell me I wasn't good enough. And most importantly, I stayed true to my values. Money doesn't make you successful, character does." The students nodded, taking in her words. Later that day, as Sophia walked through the halls of the school, she realized that no matter how much her life had changed, her heart remained in the same place. The framed prenuptial agreement still hung in her office at Von Sterling Global, a reminder of the day everything had changed. It was once meant to strip her of any claim to wealth, but now it was a symbol of how life had turned the tables. Jonathan, once her adversary, now sought her advice on business matters. Ethan, the man who had always loved her for who she was, remained her partner in life and leadership. Her parents, Albert and Nina, had finally reclaimed the love they had lost so many years ago. She had proven that wealth was not about power but about purpose. And so, as another year passed, Sophia continued to build a legacy, not just of business success, but of compassion, wisdom, and change. Every evening, she would return home to the sound of laughter, to the warmth of her family. Every Sunday, Jonathan Sterling would arrive, no longer the feared CEO, but a grandfather eager to spend time with his grandchildren. And every Monday, Sophia would stand in front of a classroom, ready to teach another group of young minds that success was not measured in money, but in the impact one made on the world. Her journey had been unexpected, challenging, and extraordinary. But above all, it had been worth it. And in the end, Sophia knew that she had truly won, not just in business, but in life. Sophia sat at her desk late into the night, her attention divided between the glowing screen in front of her and the pile of documents scattered across the desk. Von Sterling Global's upcoming global expansion into emerging markets was at a pivotal stage. She was finalizing a pitch that could solidify the company's place as a leader in sustainable technologies, a project that had the potential to change everything. Her mind raced through numbers, strategies, and timelines, but despite the intensity of her work, something felt off. The weight of everything she was juggling, from the business decisions to her personal life, pressed down on her. As she reviewed one last slide for the presentation, she heard the faint sound of a conversation. The voice was coming from the living room. She hesitated for a moment, trying to focus, but then it hit her, the voice was Ethan's. She immediately straightened up in her chair. She'd never heard him speak in that tone before, distant, almost intimate. Her heart skipped a beat. She stood up quietly and moved toward the door, pausing when she realized she wasn't just hearing the conversation, she was overhearing it. Underscore 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 underscore. Ethan on the phone, his voice soft, low, and distant. "I can't stop thinking about you." You know we can't stay away from each other forever. I'll handle everything here. Just wait a little longer. Underscore 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 underscore. Sophia's stomach dropped. The world seemed to slow down around her. She was frozen in the hallway, just outside the door of the living room, struggling to process the words she had just heard. Her breath caught in her throat as a sickening realization hit her. Ethan, her husband, the man who had promised to stand by her, the man she had trusted with everything, had been keeping a secret from her. The thought that he could betray her felt like an icy weight in the pit of her stomach, dragging her down into a place she didn't want to visit. The noise around her became muffled, as if the walls had suddenly thickened. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the floor beneath her feet becoming less stable, as though the ground had shifted in a way she couldn't understand. Every inch of her screamed for her to walk away, to confront him right then and there, but she couldn't. Instead, she stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to process what she had just heard. The conversation continued, but she couldn't bring herself to listen any longer. She turned and walked quietly toward the kitchen, feeling as though her body was moving without her permission. She leaned against the counter, her hand gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her thoughts collided, her mind racing from one question to the next, each one more painful than the last. Who was he talking to? How long had this been going on? Why didn't she see the signs? Her marriage, the very foundation of her personal and professional life, was crumbling before her eyes, and she had no idea how to put it all back together. The pain of the betrayal was sharper than anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't just about the trust that had been shattered. It was about the unraveling of everything she had believed in, and she didn't know if she could pick up the pieces. Not when everything she thought was solid had just turned into dust. The following morning, a suffocating silence hung between Sophia and Ethan. The weight of the night before was still heavy in the air, neither of them daring to speak, as if any word spoken could shatter what was left of their already fractured reality. Sophia had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the conversation she had overheard, each word Ethan had spoken carving deeper into her heart. She stood in the middle of their living room, her back straight but her eyes heavy with the weight of hurt. She hadn't known how to begin the conversation, but the silence was unbearable now. She couldn't pretend anymore, not when everything she'd built with Ethan felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and turned to face him. Sophia, quietly holding back tears, is it true? Did you, Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, but she couldn't let herself break down. Not yet. Not until she had answers. Ethan, standing across the room, visibly shifted uncomfortably, not meeting her eyes. He looked worn out, his posture slouched, the guilt etched all over his face. Ethan sighs deeply, avoiding her gaze. Sophia, cutting him off, her voice hardening, did you cheat on me? All this time? With her? Ethan's silence only confirmed the truth she had already known. It felt as though the room had closed in around her, the words barely leaving her lips as the realization hit. She was fighting to keep herself composed, her breath shaky, but the hurt, the betrayal, cut deeper than she could have ever imagined. Ethan, guilt-ridden, looking down, I never meant for it to happen like this. It's complicated, Sophia. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I do. At his words, a bitter laugh escaped Sophia's lips, a laugh that sounded more like a sob. Her heart shattered into pieces, the pain of his words almost more than she could bear. She took a step back, her mind racing. The man she thought she knew, the man she had trusted with her life, her heart, and her empire had just destroyed everything. Sophia, her voice trembling, still trying to hold it together, you love me? Then how could you do this to me? How could you betray me like this when we've been building everything together? We've built this, Ethan. Everything we have, everything we've worked for, didn't it mean anything to you? Her voice cracked with the weight of the question, the disbelief still too fresh. Ethan took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, but she instinctively recoiled, as if his touch would burn her. He flinched, guilt weighing down his every movement. "Ethan," softly, "Sophia, I don't expect you to understand right now. But it wasn't about not loving you, it was. I don't know. It was a moment of weakness, something I can't explain." Sophia, shaking her head, her eyes wide with hurt. "A moment of weakness? A moment of weakness? You've been betraying me for how long, Ethan? And you think a simple apology will fix this? I've given you everything. My love, my trust, my dedication, my life. And you just threw it all away with no regard for the consequences. How can you expect me to ever believe in you again?" Tears were beginning to gather in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to break down in front of him, not when he had shattered her heart. Ethan remained silent, his face a mask of regret, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, but Sophia couldn't find it within herself to forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Sophia," her voice cold, sharp, "how could you do this to me, Ethan? How could you betray me like this when we've been building everything together? You're not the man I thought you were. You're not the man I married." Her words stung like a slap, and she could see the hurt flash across his face. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. Ethan had proven that no matter how much they had shared, no matter how strong they'd been together, it meant nothing when trust was broken. The foundation of their entire life was now in ruins. Ethan, desperately, reaching out to her, "I'm sorry, Sophia. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me, I never meant for this to happen." Sophia, voice rising in anguish, "But it did, Ethan. It did. You hurt me. You broke me. And I don't know if I can ever come back from this. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've done." She took a step back as though physically distancing herself from him, from everything they had shared. It was as though the person she had loved for so long no longer existed, replaced by someone she didn't recognize, someone who had torn their life apart without a second thought. The silence that followed was deafening, and Sophia's mind spun with 1,000 thoughts, each one colder than the last. She had never imagined her marriage ending like this, not with lies, not with betrayal. "Sophia," voice cracking, "I thought you were my partner, Ethan. But now I see. I was alone all this time. All along I was alone." With that she turned and walked away, her heart heavier with each step. She knew there was no going back now. The life they had built together was over, and everything that had once felt so certain had unraveled in the blink of an eye. The morning after the confrontation with Ethan felt like a blur to Sophia. She hadn't slept, the weight of the betrayal hanging over her, suffocating her. Every thought was a storm in her head of the man she had loved, of the company she had fought to build, and of the future that now seemed uncertain at best. But as much as she wanted to curl up and let the world fall away, there was no escaping the reality that awaited her. Von Sterling Global was in crisis, and she could not afford to ignore it, no matter how personal her pain was. She walked into her office that morning, the hum of the city beyond the window somehow louder than usual, as if the world outside was indifferent to the turmoil inside. The stack of papers on her desk seemed to mock her, schedules, projections, reports, her life once again reduced to numbers and decisions that she had to face head-on. The stock ticker on her computer flashed in real time. Von Sterling's stock price had plummeted overnight. She stared at the numbers for what felt like an eternity, the red arrows flashing before her eyes. The market had reacted poorly to the delays in their latest projects, a setback she had been trying to manage for weeks. But now the damage was deeper than she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed, dragging her from her thoughts. It was a message from Jonathan Sterling, her father-in-law, one of the board members, and a man who had been her greatest opponent and, in some ways, her greatest ally. Jonathan's message: "We need to meet. The board is growing concerned. Von Sterling's reputation is on the line. You need to address this. Fast." Sophia exhaled sharply. The reputation crisis was as damaging as the financial one. Her company, once admired for its transparency and sustainability initiatives, was now being scrutinized under a microscope. Internal leaks, some of which were still being traced back to disgruntled former employees, had spread rumors that Von Sterling was incapable of delivering on its promises. Her head spun as she dialed a conference call with the board. As the voices of key executives began to filter in, their concern was palpable. Board Member 1, nervously, Sophia, we're seeing an increasing number of investors pull out. The delays, the leaks, this is beyond a simple setback. We're at risk of a complete collapse if we don't address this immediately. Board Member 2, angrily, how could you let this happen? We've been talking about the same issues for months. You promised us stability and now it's all falling apart. Sophia's pulse quickened, the weight of their accusations hitting harder than any stock drop ever could. She could feel the walls closing in, the betrayal from Ethan still raw in her chest, but now was not the time to break down. She forced herself to focus. Sophia, steeling herself, I understand the gravity of this situation and I am taking full responsibility. But I won't allow anyone to undermine everything we've worked for. I need everyone's full cooperation to turn this around. We will not go down without a fight. The room went silent for a moment as her words sank in. Her father, Albert Vaughn, joined the call, his voice always calm and steady, but Sophia could hear the concern in his tone. Albert, gently, Sophia, listen to me. You've done the right thing by confronting this head-on. It's going to be a tough road, but I know you can handle this. You've faced tougher challenges than this before. Sophia wanted to lean on her father to take comfort in his wisdom, but instead, her heart felt heavy. The weight of her personal crisis was now colliding head-on with the corporate storm. Her company, her life's work, was falling apart, and she was at the center of it all. Sophia, with a hint of frustration, it's not just about numbers, Dad. It's about trust. The team is fractured and the investors are scared. We can't just keep making promises we can't keep. I need to find a way to fix this fast. Her mind raced with the options in front of her. She had spent so many years building Von Sterling Global into a beacon of hope in the business world, a company focused on more than just profit, but on making a difference. Now it felt like everything she had worked for was slipping away. Sophia, with finality, I'll meet with the team. I'll address the board directly. And we'll get this under control. As she hung up the phone, she sat back in her chair, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. But Sophia wasn't one to give up easily. She had always known that leadership meant carrying the burden when things went wrong, and right now everything was wrong. She wiped the tears that threatened to fall, took a deep breath, and prepared for the battle ahead. Her personal and professional lives were in ruins, but this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of her fight to save everything she had built. Sophia sat at the head of the boardroom table, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. The room was suffocating, the tension so thick it felt like the walls were closing in around her. The faces of the board members, many of whom were loyal to Jonathan Sterling, watched her intently, their eyes filled with a mixture of frustration, concern, and skepticism. They had always expected her to be a rock, strong, unshakable, the one who could navigate the company through any storm. But today they weren't sure that was the case. Board Member 1, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a perpetually tense expression, leaned forward, his voice sharp and impatient. Board Member 1, leaning over the table, Sophia, this is unacceptable. The numbers are slipping. Von Sterling Global is losing its edge and the market is losing faith. You've been distracted by personal matters and this company is suffering for it. This is a crisis and we need you to act, not grieve. Sophia's hands clenched around the edge of the table, her fingers digging into the polished surface. She felt the sting of his words, but she held her ground, suppressing the surge of emotion that threatened to bubble to the surface. Her whole world had been turned upside down: Ethan's betrayal, the financial collapse, the company on the brink of losing everything. But there was no room for her to break down, not now. Not here. Sophia, her voice steady but with a faint tremor, you think I don't know that? You think I'm not doing everything I can to keep this company afloat while my whole world falls apart? Her gaze swept over the faces of the board members, many of whom were looking at her with increasing doubt. Jonathan's allies, her greatest critics, were glaring at her, waiting for her to falter. They wanted results and they wanted them now. Sophia, forcing her voice to remain calm, I'm doing everything I can. I've been working around the clock to address the issues, and I don't need a lecture from you on the state of the company. You want results? Then get behind me because this company is not giving up. The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, a clear declaration that she was not going to back down. But even as she spoke with authority, there was a crack in her voice, a small vulnerability that no one had missed. Her confidence was undeniable, but Sophia felt the battle inside her intensifying. Her personal pain was feeding into her professional decisions, and the cracks were starting to show. One of the board members, Board Member 2, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp features and cold eyes, broke the silence. She had always been skeptical of Sophia's approach, and now she seemed ready to push her to the breaking point. Board Member 2, coldly, Sophia, your personal life may be affecting your ability to lead. We understand you're dealing with some complications, but the reality is the company can't afford to wait for you to figure it all out. We need action, not excuses. Sophia's heart raced at the words, but she forced herself to take a deep breath, pushing back the tears that threatened to rise. She couldn't afford to let them see her break down. Not now. Not in front of them. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she clenched them into fists, trying to steady herself. Sophia, gritting her teeth, I am not making excuses. This company is still standing because of the work I've done, the vision I've had. And I'm not about to let it crumble just because we're facing a challenge. But you have to understand we are in this together. This company isn't just mine, it's ours. So if you want me to fight for it, you need to fight with me. She could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment, the doubt. It was almost like a physical presence in the room, pushing down on her. But she couldn't let them see her falter. She had to keep going. Sophia, her voice growing stronger, you want results? You get them by supporting me. You don't get results by standing on the sidelines and questioning my every move. I am doing everything in my power to make sure that Von Sterling Global survives this. If we want to get through this, we need to come together as a team. That means you, every single one of you, needs to stop doubting me and start doing your part. Her chest tightened as she spoke, the strain of holding everything together becoming almost unbearable. The anger, the frustration, the hurt, it all threatened to burst forth, but she couldn't let it. She needed to stay focused. For the company. For herself. For the life they had built together. The silence that followed her words was heavy. No one spoke. Board Member 1 exchanged a glance with Board Member 2, both of them clearly considering her words. Finally, it was Jonathan's voice that broke the stillness. Jonathan, with a sigh, Sophia, we've been through worse, you and I. I know what you're capable of. But right now, you need to prove that you can still lead this company through the storm. We need results. And we need them fast. Sophia nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. Her father had always believed in her, but even now she could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. She had to pull herself together. She had to be the leader she once was, strong, unshakable. She couldn't afford to be broken by anything, least of all Ethan's betrayal. Sophia, her voice steady now, I will prove it. I won't let this company go under. You have my word. As the meeting ended, Sophia sat there, still feeling the pressure building, the strain on her shoulders heavier than ever. But in that moment, she knew there was no turning back. She was in this alone now, fighting for everything she had built, her marriage, and her company. The battle was just beginning. The night felt like it was dragging on, stretching into something unbearable. Sophia stood by the window in their bedroom, the city lights shimmering in the distance. The cool night air brushed against her skin, but she didn't feel its chill. She was numb, lost in the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed her since the moment she overheard Ethan's confession. The betrayal hung over her like a dark cloud, suffocating her every thought. Behind her, Ethan was pacing, his face drawn and pale. He had come to her again, desperate to fix what had been broken, but Sophia didn't know if there was anything left to fix. She hadn't known what it felt like to feel so torn apart, so alone in her own home. The man she had trusted above all others had shattered everything they had built, her trust, her love, their life together. Ethan, voice breaking, approaching her slowly, I'm sorry, Sophia. I made a terrible mistake. Please don't throw everything away. I know I've hurt you, but I can't lose you." Sophia didn't respond right away. Her eyes were fixed on the skyline, her body tense as she fought to keep herself together. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she couldn't bring herself to turn around. Not yet. She wasn't ready to face him, not when everything felt like it was falling apart. Ethan, stepping closer, his voice raw, "I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I swear. I didn't think about what it would do to us to you. It was a moment of weakness, and I know that's no excuse. But I love you and I can't lose you. Please, please let me make this right." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Love. It had been the foundation of everything between them, the bond that had made them partners in business and life. But now it felt hollow. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but it wasn't enough to heal the wound he had inflicted on her. It wasn't enough to fix what had been shattered between them. She finally turned to face him, her eyes locked on his, but her expression was unreadable. She couldn't see the man she had once loved in front of her anymore. The betrayal had changed everything. Ethan had broken her trust, and the damage was so deep, so irrevocable, that she wasn't sure if she could ever rebuild what had been lost. "Sophia," her voice steady but laced with hurt, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan. This isn't just about me. It's about the person you've become. How could you do this to me after everything we've been through? All the sacrifices, the moments we shared? You were my partner, my husband. I trusted you and you betrayed me." Her words hung in the air, sharp and painful, the reality of what he had done settling over both of them like a heavy blanket. Ethan flinched as though each word was a blow to him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, as though he were trying to find the right thing to say, but he couldn't. "Ethan," softly, almost pleading, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that. I know I've hurt you, I know I failed you. But I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I made the worst mistake of my life. Please just give me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I swear." Sophia closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had wanted to believe him, to believe in their love and the life they had built together. But it was hard to trust in something that had been broken so completely. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being the leader in both her personal and professional life. But now, standing here in this moment of devastation, she wasn't sure she could keep going, not with the same person who had torn her apart. She took a deep breath, her heart aching as she looked back at him. He was standing there, vulnerable, eyes filled with regret and remorse, but that wasn't enough anymore. His betrayal wasn't something that could be undone with words. "Sophia," her voice cold, her resolve firm. "Love isn't enough anymore, Ethan. You've broken my trust and I don't know if I can ever rebuild it. You say you love me, but that love wasn't enough to stop you from making a choice that hurt me in the worst way possible. That's what I can't forgive." Her words hit him like a blow. He took a step back, as if physically recoiling from the weight of her words. For the first time, Sophia saw the full extent of his regret, his guilt. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done. He had made his choice, and now she had to make hers. "Sophia," quietly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I need time, Ethan. I need time to figure out if there's anything left of us, of what we once had. But right now I can't look at you and see the man I loved. I see a stranger. And I don't know if I can forgive that." Ethan stood in silence, his face full of sorrow, unable to offer anything more. He had done what he could to beg for her forgiveness, but it was clear to both of them now that some wounds were too deep to heal. Sophia turned back to the window, her gaze once again fixed on the city lights. She could feel the tears that threatened to fall, but she refused to let them. She had always been strong, and she would need to be stronger now than ever before. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, or if there was even a future for them at all. But one thing was certain, she could no longer live in the shadow of the betrayal. The time had come for her to choose her own path forward, whatever that might look like. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia felt the full weight of the decision she had to make. She wasn't sure she could rebuild, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the past. Not anymore. The tension in the air at Von Sterling Global had never been thicker. As the company's crisis deepened, the weight of Sophia's personal and professional battles seemed to be pushing her to the brink. She had spent the last few weeks trying to hold it all together, but with every passing day, the cracks in her leadership were growing wider. The board of directors, already skeptical of her ability to manage both the company's financial decline and her personal issues, began to question her every move. Sophia sat in the conference room, her gaze focused on the financial reports in front of her. The numbers were disastrous. Von Sterling's stock had continued its freefall, and the competitors were circling like sharks, taking advantage of her company's weakened state. The rival company, led by a ruthless CEO with a history of aggressive takeovers, had made several attempts to acquire Von Sterling's most valuable assets. Every day, more of the company's core business seemed to slip through her fingers. The shareholders had already started putting pressure on the board to act, demanding drastic changes to stabilize the company. The suggestion of a restructuring had begun to take form: sell off divisions, lay off employees, liquidate valuable properties, anything to prevent the company from sinking further. Sophia had always been an advocate for responsible, ethical business practices, but now, faced with the threat of collapse, she was forced to consider options she never thought possible. Board Member 1, frustrated. Sophia, we need to make moves, and we need to make them fast. If we don't restructure, we'll be out of business within the month. The competitors are already circling. We're being outpaced in every direction. The longer we wait, the worse it's going to get. Sophia felt the weight of his words like a punch to the gut. She had built this company from the ground up. She had always prided herself on leading with integrity, on making choices that weren't just about profits, but about doing the right thing. But now everything was collapsing, and the pressure to act fast was crushing her. Sophia, softly, I know, but we can't just sell off everything we've worked for. We can't give up our values for the sake of saving face. There has to be another way. Board Member 2, sharply. There isn't, Sophia. You need to face reality. Your personal issues have compromised your ability to lead, and the company is paying the price. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything. Her pulse quickened. She knew the board had lost faith in her. They were no longer listening to her vision. They were only interested in saving the company in the quickest way possible, regardless of the long-term consequences. Meanwhile, employees began to leave in droves, one after another, unable to stomach the uncertainty of the company's future. The once thriving corporate culture, built on trust and shared purpose, was now in tatters. Corporate morale plummeted, and the company's reputation took another hit with each resignation, each departure from the team. The rumors and leaks about Von Sterling's future circulated like wildfire, and investors pulled out by the handful. Sophia felt the walls closing in. The future of Von Sterling Global, her empire, her life's work, was slipping further and further away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She was at a crossroads, forced to choose between salvaging what remained of the company or letting it go entirely. As she stared out the window of her office, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, her mind was consumed by the enormity of the decision. She couldn't bear the thought of losing it all, but the company she had once been so proud of was now a shell of its former self. She had tried to lead with honor, with integrity, but now it felt like everything she had built was crumbling to dust. The next step seemed almost impossible to take. She could either make the hard decisions to sell off parts of the business, to give in to the pressure from the board and shareholders, or she could walk away and let it all fall apart. Either way, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The company, her marriage, everything, had already been irreparably changed. Sophia closed her eyes, a deep breath escaping her lips. The fight wasn't over yet, but it sure felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The dim light from the desk lamp cast long shadows across Sophia's office, the city outside her windows barely visible beneath the haze of the night. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her, and every breath felt like a heavy burden. Von Sterling Global, the company she had poured her heart and soul into, was on the brink of collapse. It was no longer a matter of if but when. She had spent her entire life building this empire, shaping it with values she believed in: ethics, responsibility, and integrity. But now, as everything she had worked for slipped through her fingers, Sophia couldn't escape the realization that it wasn't just the company that was falling apart. Her marriage, her sense of self, even her future were all in jeopardy. She was at a crossroads. The decision before her was monumental, and she knew that whatever choice she made, it would change the course of her life forever. Her phone sat on the desk before her, the screen glowing softly in the quiet room. Ethan's name flashed across the screen, a reminder of everything she had once believed in. Her fingers hovered over the phone, her heart beating in her throat. She couldn't keep avoiding this conversation, not when it was so clear that everything was unraveling. "Sophia," calmly, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Ethan, it's over. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I need to focus on the company, and I need to focus on whether I can trust myself again." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment Sophia thought he might hang up, might not even respond. But then she heard his voice, choked with emotion, cracking under the weight of his regret. "Ethan," choking back tears. "Don't do this, Sophia. Please. I'll fix this. I can make it right. Just give me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes. I love you. Please don't walk away." His words stabbed at her heart, a mixture of desperation and love that she had once craved, but now only felt like another form of manipulation. She had heard these words before, but they had lost their meaning. How could she trust them now? How could she trust him after everything he had done? After everything that had been broken between them? "Sophia," her voice firm, resolute. "It's not just about fixing things, Ethan. It's about whether I can trust you, and whether I can trust myself to keep fighting for a company that's falling apart because of all the things I've ignored for too long. I've been so focused on making everyone else happy, on keeping this company afloat, that I've ignored the truth. And now I don't know if I can keep pretending anymore." Her heart ached as she spoke, but the truth was undeniable. The weight of her responsibilities, both personal and professional, was more than she could bear. Her marriage, which had once been her anchor, had now become the very thing that held her back. She could feel the pieces of her life slipping away, and the fear of losing it all was suffocating. She didn't know what to do anymore. There was another silence, long and agonizing. She could hear Ethan on the other end, his breath unsteady, his sobs barely contained. But Sophia knew there was no going back. She had reached the point where sacrificing everything for the company would mean losing herself completely. "Sophia," her voice breaking with finality, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I can't keep doing this. I need to focus on what's left of the company. I need to make sure it survives, but more importantly, I need to make sure I survive. I need to find myself again." With that, she hung up the phone, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest like a stone. The room was eerily silent now, the hum of the city outside somehow feeling miles away. Sophia stood, motionless, staring at the phone in her hand, the decision feeling both liberating and heartbreaking at the same time. She had chosen the company. She had chosen to fight for her legacy, for everything she had spent her life building. But in doing so, she had left behind the man she had loved, the man who had promised to stand by her through everything. The betrayal had hurt more than she had ever imagined, and even though she had made her decision, it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Sophia stood there for a long time, facing the open window. Her mind was clouded with doubts, with fears of what would come next. The road ahead was uncertain, and she knew it would be a hard, lonely journey. But she also knew that she couldn't continue to fight for a marriage that no longer existed, for a person who had betrayed her. She needed to reclaim her strength, her focus, and rebuild her life, not just for Von Sterling, but for herself. The path forward wasn't clear, but Sophia knew she had made the right choice. The weight of her responsibilities remained, but now she had a sense of clarity. The company was her legacy, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. The phone call had ended, but Sophia's journey was only just beginning. As we move into 2025, this story offers valuable insights into the importance of integrity, trust, and personal boundaries in both our professional and personal lives. In today's fast-paced, high-stress business world, the pressure to succeed can lead to difficult choices, often forcing us to balance our values against external expectations. The story emphasizes that true leadership involves more than just financial success. It requires personal resilience, the ability to make tough decisions, and a commitment to maintaining ethical principles even when faced with adversity. For anyone navigating a leadership role in 2025, this story serves as a reminder that success should not come at the cost of personal well-being. It highlights the importance of knowing when to step back and reassess, ensuring that personal and professional lives are in alignment. In times of crisis, we often find ourselves at a crossroads, as Sophia does, where we must decide whether to preserve our legacy or make personal sacrifices. From this story, we learned that prioritizing authenticity and taking accountability can lead us to more meaningful, sustainable success. Trust both in ourselves and in others remains the foundation for navigating any professional journey. Sophia has given everything: her heart, her trust, and her life's work to both her marriage and Von Sterling Global, but now she's faced with a gut-wrenching decision that could shape the course of her future forever. Betrayed by the person she loved most and confronted with the collapse of everything she's built, Sophia is at a crossroads. Does she keep fighting for the company, risking her personal happiness and integrity, or does she walk away from it all to reclaim her peace and trust? Now we turn to you, the audience. What would you do in Sophia's shoes? Should she continue to fight for her legacy, even if it means sacrificing her personal happiness? Or is it time for her to let go, to heal, and to rebuild herself? Your thoughts, your ideas, and your perspective are crucial as we navigate the next steps in her journey. We want to hear your voice. Share your comments, suggestions, and what you think Sophia should do next. Should she rebuild her empire at the cost of her personal life, or is it time to focus on healing and starting anew? Your support could help Sophia make this life-changing decision. Your input matters. Let's guide her through this pivotal moment together.